Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. On this podcast, we go week to week, discussing one of your streaming favorites, providing some conversation and some insight along the way. I'm your host, Victor, and joining me for this conversation later will be Sona, as she has been co-hosting all of these Your Friends and Neighbors episodes. Today, we'll be breaking down that third episode of Season 2, We Were Never Supposed to Get This Old. Sona has just been traveling for work and she is currently taking a nap, but we'll be joining this conversation later. So while I have this time to myself, I'm going to give you a little outline of what occurred in this particular episode before we start to break down and give our critical opinions on some of the positive and not so positive aspects of this particular episode. But I've also been watching some other things that dovetail with the themes of this show and other shows we've been covering here in the podcast. And I'll be getting to that in just a moment. A couple of pieces of show news as well. Firstly, my wife and I will be discussing The Pit. We just watched that very emotional season finale of that show, and we'll be discussing it in greater detail today. Expect that episode sometime in the overnight or morning. And also expect in that episode for me to be announcing the Patreon itself. So the URL should be in this show notes, I believe. I'll be ready to include the link here in these show notes if you want to go and peruse the content that's available there. But definitely an official announcement with the next episode. All right, a couple of things I want to talk about before we even get into this particular episode of Your Friends and Neighbors. A couple of shows that popped up this very week, coincidentally, or maybe this is me making connections that were completely accidental, or maybe these themes just keep being reiterated in the films and TV shows that are premiering recently. But a couple of films have come out, a couple of series premiered this very week that are interesting co-watches with some of the other shows we're covering here officially, Your Friends and Neighbors, and also Euphoria, which we just began covering on the podcast this past week. If you're curious, by the way, if you wanted to sample Euphoria, maybe you only watched season 1 and are behind on it, or didn't really enjoy season 2, or don't really want to have to do the homework of reminding yourself of what happened in that season. If you're curious about it, and honestly, I don't know if the show's going to be good or not, but and Darren and I had a conversation about this earlier this week, of course, and we'll continue to watch the show. At least in the meantime, I've joked that we probably will quit on the show some point during the season, which is my experience with Euphoria in general. However, this is only 6 episodes, and I really think that they'll be able to keep us engaged for 6 episodes at least. Even if the last episode is terrible, we'll probably have enough juice to get through those 6 episodes. But all this is to say that if you wanted to just sample it, one of the most interesting things that they've done with this current season, this third season, and probably the last, I would assume, considering how hard it is to get this very busy cast together, you really can go in cold. This is a reboot to a large extent. Having an understanding of who these characters are, their interactions with each other, their relationships to each other, obviously are essential to fully appreciate what's happening on the show. But if you just want to take the film or series at face value, that it is just this critique of capitalism, which is the surprise here, right? That the show very much is showing that all these people, especially these young people just starting out their careers, are all hustling in one way or another, whether they present to have a legitimate business, whether they are starting an OnlyFans site, whether they are smuggling drugs, that in the end, they just want to make some money. And there is this vision of America that only cares if you are successful. And then arguably, how you become successful is secondary. And that is an interesting theme, along with what we've already seen with Euphoria previously, just incredible technical filmmaking. And interestingly, of course, here is another show, Your Friends and Neighbors, a show that again is critiquing capitalism, is asking us that in the end, these folks who are supposedly all on the up and up, these are the successful people, these are the legitimate people. But of course, Coop is this criminal. But who's the real criminal here? And how do these people make their money? And why do they need so much money? And what drives them when they've already achieved so much success? And there's always there's always another rung on the ladder. There's always more to be had. And honestly, Your Friends and Neighbors has not done a great job of exploring those ideas, but at least raises them, at least raises the questions, even as they go relatively unexplored. But in the midst of all this, we have another couple of shows that premiered this very week. The first one, Margo's Got Money Trouble. Trouble or Troubles? Troubles. Margo's Got Money Troubles. And this is also on Apple TV and premiered with 3 episodes this week. And if you've been curious to check this out, I would say watch all 3 episodes of the premiere. These are relatively short episodes. They could have been even shorter, honestly. A 30-minute episode would have been preferred, but they're all in the 40-minute range. So a 3-episode watch is about the length of a movie. And it stars Elle Fanning, who's now 28 years old, probably 26 or 27 when making this show, and playing a college freshman. I guess she'll age, at this point, she's probably aged up to, would be like a sophomore age, let's say, but still playing very young, surprisingly, but maybe necessary for the content of the show. And she finds that she starts an affair with her college professor and ends up getting pregnant, but decides to keep the baby. By the way, this is based on a best-selling book. And the character is an aspiring writer and starts to write a book. I assume at this point, it's just a book. It could be, you can imagine this being like a blog that she's maintaining, to be honest. Maybe that'll be the case as the show progresses, about the struggles she has in trying to support her child. And she has a beautiful but pretty self-centered mom, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who still looks incredible at her age, and is giving a great performance as this former Hooters girl who still is very much about herself, and still obsessed with landing a husband and providing for herself. So very much in Arrested Development, this type of mom character. And in many ways, her daughter, the Elle Fanning character, is the more mature person of the two. And she has an estranged father, played by Nick Offerman, who is a former wrestler, or the wrestling name is Jinx. And she barely has a relationship with him, just texting here and there. And what happens is this baby enters the scene and disrupts their current plan, but in a way starts to bring these different estranged family members together. This is from David E. Kelley. I'm not always a huge fan of Kelley's writing, to be honest, mostly these pot boilers that he's made in the past few years. And I believe this is the first time Michelle Pfeiffer has appeared in anything that he has created, despite the fact that they've been married for many years. And if you did sample this, it's a pretty slow episode 1, and this tone maintains. It's very straight-faced. There's a lot of comedy here, but it's all played very straight. There's a lot of heart here. The characters, you really love these characters by the end of these 3 episodes. And the premise of the show, this is the premise, so I hope this isn't a spoiler to anybody. If you've seen 10 seconds of this trailer, you know what it's about. But basically, the Elle Fanning character, eventually starts an OnlyFans, and that's the way that she's able to pay for her child. And we're just the beginning of that, by the way. 3 episodes in, she literally has just created her OnlyFans page. So this is a slow, that's the hook in minute 5. It really shows you how desperate things get for her and how difficult it is for her to even just have a waitressing job with a child at home, with no one to help her with the child support, worried about medical bills, etc. And it's just the realities of living on the margins in the upper, I should say, in the middle classes. So it's like actually someone who's not presenting as being impoverished, but could very easily fall into very dangerous economic straits, especially with a brand new baby. And the odd ways that they're able to make this work, whether it is the dad who's had addiction and health problems in the past, now suddenly a roommate of hers for the first time in her life, someone who's been absent for so long, and then ending up being the caretaker when she's trying to find legitimate work. And of course, finding this community in a way through OnlyFans. So very unconventional version of the American dream, but that's really what's intriguing about this. Not only are the characters lovable, not only is there real heart to this, like a real care for these people, not only is this comedic, and yet there's a sense of sadness to all of these interactions as you're watching them. There's the estranged family that's trying to repair itself. There is just the despondency oftentimes of the situation and how little opportunity Margo actually has. But in the midst of all that sadness, there's real heart, there's real warmth, and the show is fun even as it is exploring all these things. And of course, at the center of all of it is Elle Fanning, who's been having just an incredible year. Academy Award nomination for Sentimental Value, of course, this year. And practically the same week, I think that opened here in the United States, that film, which ended up getting nominated for Best Picture as well. She also was in Predator Badlands and gave a great dual performance there, playing this very chipper, very over-the-top, goofy android, and then, of course, the most cynical and dark version of her twin as well in that film. So a great dual performance. That's available on Hulu now if you haven't caught up with it already. So appearing in a blockbuster sci-fi film and getting an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress and appearing in this show and maybe getting another Emmy nomination as well. So great year for Elle Fanning, great performance on her part. She really grounds the whole entire thing. And just this tone that the show has, like very quirky, very offbeat, but really engaging. It is a slow burn, like I mentioned, but if you commit to it, do check all 3 of those episodes out. And the button on the 3rd episode is just so hilarious. As I mentioned before, she's just opened the OnlyFans. And it's such a positive view of the experience of opening it on OnlyFans, because when she actually finally goes on there, she's like, oh my God, that's the place where people make porn and sell their porn to random strangers. And the montage we see, of course, definitely a sugar-coated version of this, I'm sure. I mean, I don't have much experience with seeing any OnlyFans, but I've heard of the phenomena of it. Of course, many people have become incredibly rich, and people who were adult entertainers have now, in a probably much less dangerous to their own lives and to their own bodies way of directly communicating with their fans, and have become very successful, and in a way have empowered themselves with these relationships. So there's the positive side of it. There's obviously the negative side of it. A lot of these people have unhealthy outcomes, people who work in this industry, period. But this show so far, I assume there will be darker sides to this as well, is a very positive view of this, a very sex positive view of starting an OnlyFans. And as I mentioned, there's like this montage as she goes on there and starts to discover what the community is about. None of these people are overtly doing sex work. They are communicating with their fans and sometimes just sitting on the sofa and watching TV or making fun of people or just communicating directly with these people who are supporting them. And it's this strange view that I don't think, a perspective I haven't really had on this type of topic, where there's a community she's finding there that she doesn't necessarily have in her traditional life. And there's something like really beautiful about that. And of course, a very interesting parallel to seeing on Euphoria, for example, where the Sydney Sweeney character has also started an OnlyFans. And we haven't got to it yet, but I am pretty sure that Euphoria, being Euphoria, is going to have a very dark and grim view of that lifestyle, showing the most depraved aspects of it, as that show is wont to do. And I do find it an interesting experiment to see these 2 very different views on this true phenomena within the culture itself, something that has empowered a lot of these creators and generated billions of dollars of wealth collectively for these people, and yet is, obviously a very fringe phenomena. So all that is very interesting to me anyway. And of course, this very week as well, one of my favorite miniseries of the past few years, and really probably should have been a one and done, despite the fact that we are enjoying the 2nd season. But of course, it could have just been called anything, but the show I'm talking about is Beef on Netflix season 2. If you did watch season 1 of Beef, which was absolutely extraordinary, there is now Beef season 2 from the same creators of the original series. My wife and I binged 3.5 episodes of the show, and perhaps we'll watch a little bit more of it. And we will definitely be discussing some of this in our conversation along with the pit when we re-record that conversation. And we'll probably circle back to it yet again over the course of the next week or so once we wrap up the series, possibly discussing this with Darren in our Euphoria follow-up conversation, and maybe even get our wives all on the podcast together. It might be fun. So stay tuned for that too, by the way. In the next Euphoria recap conversation with Darren, we will have seen most, if not all, of Beef, and we'll be discussing it there. But as a preview to all of that, we'll probably discuss it briefly, but I'm going to bring it up already here because it just so directly ties into the themes of these other shows I just described. Whereas Your Friends and Neighbors is exploring in its own way the lure of this drive to continuously be richer no matter what, or at least present that success even when you don't actually have it. And whereas Margo has money troubles, is talking about someone who can barely make ends meet and may find empowerment and financial success from the most unconventional aspect of this modern culture. What Beef argues is that no matter how much success you achieve in this hamster wheel of need and drive and the illusion of more, and that once you get to more, then you're like, well, maybe I can get a little bit more, and that never-ending need for more and more and more that we are all trapped by in this culture. Beef does this by having these 3 parallel stories of couples in very different circumstances and then parallels them to each other. Season 1 was really about a road rage incident that got completely out of control. Stephen Yoon and Ali Wong, and that this person who's trying to hustle their way into the culture, and this woman who's very successful, but that success is very fragile, and then seeing each other without understanding each other, not realizing how common they are to each other, and discovering that over the course of the season, but also using their hatred for each other as a way to explore these unexplored aspects of their own, honestly, hatred for aspects of themselves. That, I think, was a much more successful, and I haven't finished season 2, by the way, so maybe season 2 will land everything. Right now, in the midst of season 2, it is a little scattered to not have this clean me versus her dynamic from season 1, and instead having these 3 parallel stories, and we have to understand the relationship dynamic within these 3 different couples and their particular economic situations. It is a little diffuse, but it is interesting what it is trying to do. And I'm very hopeful, or feel that it's going to land it by the end. But even along the way, it is fascinating to watch. We begin the story with Oscar Isaac and Carey Mulligan, who are a couple. Isaac's character is the general manager of a very posh country club. Carey Mulligan is his British wife, who's moved to America. This is now decades earlier, to be in this relationship. And as time goes by, we realize they have dreams of what their lives were going to be, not only having children, they're childless, but he fantasized about being a DJ at some point, still has all his old equipment in the garage, or I guess which has become a man cave for him. He's addicted to pornography, spending money on OnlyFans as well to masturbate with these models. And we discover also that Mulligan's character is in many ways not working in a traditional way, but of course is there to present the ideal couple as part of this performance that Josh, the Oscar Isaac character, is presenting within the context of being this general manager, this powerful figure within the country club. So they all have their thwarted ambitions. The house, supposedly they purchased this house, poured money into it because it's going to be an Airbnb. That is going to be what they're going to do eventually. But as they've spent more and more money trying to fix up this house, inevitably it's that the money, the power, the influence they have is all coming from being this general manager. So they need the job that they in many ways despise. This all culminates this is the very beginning of the episode, by the way. This culminates in episode 1 with a really, really ugly fight between the two of them, where they are both absolutely terrible to each other. So no one's really clean in this version of the show. And immediately in the country club themselves, we see Kaylee Spaney and Charles Melton as this. Charles Melton, of course, who had a breakout in May, December, terrific performance in that film. And Kaylee Spaney, who's been in many things, Alien Romulus, Civil War, just a bunch of things. She's really been in a bunch of really high profile projects in the past year or two. And almost an idealized version of this young couple. He's trying to become a fitness influencer. She never finished high school, but has a lot of ambition and a lot of potential that she's never fully been able to express. And her family seems alienated from her. And it's almost like we're seeing these couples from 2 different sides of that arc. Maybe this younger couple was the Carey Mulligan and Oscar Isaac couple 20 years earlier in their youth, with all the same naive ambitions and the fantasy of where they would be once they were married and together. And of course, they see the older couple as the more established couple, and they happen to witness this fight. And this starts a toxic dynamic between the couples that gets complicated as time goes forward. It's not as neat as you would expect, but it also presents an opportunity, basically blackmail, that allows them to make these little incremental maneuvers and improve their circumstances. And of course, this all becomes a commentary of how you need to prey on someone else to get the break that you need. And maybe you deserve the break, but you need to make your own breaks in these very toxic ways potentially. But more importantly is the fact that we start to see, so maybe not so surprisingly, that in the end, this goes back to this broader theme that in the end, we're all just working for somebody else. And the only way to win this game is to not play it at all. That this young couple is in the end just serving as employees of this country club. And yet the general manager and his wife and the presentation of power within those walls are actually just working and are expected. They are just seen as hired help. They are the top of the food chain within that food chain, but they are still purely just seen as not friends, not even real people, but simply as assistants within the context, basically to these customers they have. And that dynamic starts to get fleshed out as the show progresses. And then we have a third couple, which is introduced. And it turns out that this country club is being purchased by a South Korean billionaire played by Yoon Yoo-young, who was nominated for Best Actress or Supporting Actress, I forget, for Minari, if anybody saw Minari and saw her Academy Award nominated performance there. She's there with her translator, Eunice, played by So-yo Yang. And the last part of this puzzle is the chairwoman's, this billionaire, her husband, much younger husband, played by Song Kang-ho, a plastic surgeon, famous plastic surgeon in South Korea. And of course, this actor, very recognizable from Paradise, from Memories of Murder, from The Host, from basically many Bong Joon-ho and other very successful South Korean films. So a very recognizable actor. And of course, here she has achieved everything she could possibly want. She's incredibly rich. She accounts for 2% of South Korean GDP, one of the most powerful people in South Korea, connected politically. And what we find out is within this uneven relationship, within this marriage with her younger husband, there is also a toxic dynamic. It also has blowback on her reputationally. And even she, who at this point seems to be the boss of all bosses, still is trapped by her wealth in her own way. And that's where we are about halfway through, without any spoilers, by the way. There's a lot of crazy things that happen here that I'm not going to spoil, of course. But if you did like that first season of Beef, then do check this one out as well. And we will have a lot more to say on it once we finish it. It's about a 5-hour watch all the way through. The first 3 episodes are the longest, or maybe they're not quite the longest, but we're in the midst of the 4th episode, about 2.5 more hours to go. So about halfway through, and we'll be giving our final judgment on that. But of course, most importantly, just so intriguing that all of this anxiety about what you surrender in this need to achieve more and more. So just how much of yourself do you surrender, and how this fantasy of what's going to come in the future is a driver for everybody, and then yet becomes a prison in so many ways. And the irony, of course, that as you achieve something and it doesn't match your fantasy of it, it robs that achievement of any kind of joy. So then it just pushes you for more and more and more. And how it never ends. It just basically never ends. And that is the theme across all of these programs, and probably across Euphoria, with Euphoria in there as well, considering the whole entire thing becomes a critique of our fixation with wealth at all costs. So late stage capitalism, as Austin says multiple times in the course of Beef, all of these are critiques of late stage capitalism. Okay, speaking of critiques and late stage capitalism, let's get into that conversation with Sona about Your Friends and Neighbors. Episode 3, Season 2, Episode 3, we were never supposed to get this old. And perhaps this show was never supposed to get this old either. Okay, Sona, so you just came back from the West Coast. A couple questions for you. First of all, did you have a horrible reaction to the allergens out there? Whenever I used to travel to the West Coast, it's like the pollen my body's not used to it or something, and I would have horrible allergies.
That's so interesting, because I do have terrible allergies to almost everything generally, but maybe I missed the peak of the allergy season there because
earlier,
I think I was better out there than I am here.
Interesting. Yeah. I was about to say it might be earlier. I remember one time I traveled out there in February and they had an early bloom because it was in the 50s or maybe 60s even. And I had a horrible reaction, probably because there was like no pollen in the air at all here. I was just not prepared for warm weather and
shock to your system.
Exactly. And the second question is, did you see anything on the plane or did you just take a nap on the trip back?
Oh, that's an even more appropriate question. On the way out, and actually on the way back too, I did try to mostly sleep, but I watched a few episodes of The Studio on Apple TV.
Nice. There you go.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a very funny show, and I do highly recommend it. And you may have noticed it, but pretty much every episode is a oneer. It's all shot in one single take. So the logistics of making those episodes is very complicated. And I think it might be the very second episode, which I assume you did watch, is about shooting a wire, which is very funny.
Yes. Yeah. The last episode I saw, which is, I'm pretty sure the third one, was with Ron Howard. And that was really, really funny.
Yes. I love the fact that Howard, everybody's like, oh man, he nailed it. What a great film.
Yeah.
And he wants like full editorial control. And then they cut to 45 minutes later. They're like, why is this movie still going?
And I have had that experience so many times with movies where I think they're wrapping it up. This is the end. And then it's like there's a whole second sub movie happening after that point.
Yeah. All of that show, I do recommend you finish watching it ahead of season 2, which is coming. And unfortunately is going to deal apparently directly on the show with the death of Catherine
O'Hara.
O'Hara, of course. Yes. I forgot her name there suddenly, but unfortunate, of course. She's like really had quite the past few years between Schitt's Creek, between the Beetlejuice sequel that came out last year, between The Studio. She got an Emmy nomination for that. She's been so busy. Oh, she was on The Last of Us, the second season of The Last of Us just last year. Also got another Emmy nomination for that, for drama. And she was so busy and like really in this very late peak career activity. Unfortunately, of course, she died. But they will be addressing that in some way on the second season of the series, which they actually stopped production with her death, but now have completed production. I assume before the end of the year, we'll be seeing that second season. Are you caught up with, and you don't have to go into some great detail if not, but have you continued with Imperfect Women? And did you want to add anything for the audience out there who might be continuing to watch?
So I'm one episode behind on Imperfect Women, and it is still not a good show. However, it is vastly improved from how it started. The way this season works, and I think this is modeled on the book, is there are, I'm counting in my head, 3 main women characters, one of them being the person who's murdered. And this series of episodes is broken into telling you each woman's story. The first person's story was Kerry Washington. I believe her character's name is Eleanor. And that was really, really weak and hard to watch. This second set has been the murdered woman's story, like 1,000% improved. Although, again, still not great, but 1,000% improved. And I believe in this last set, we're going to switch to Elizabeth Olsen's character. So I actually am confident it's going to continue to improve.
Interesting. That's an interesting turn of events. I'm not sure I can commit to the show at this point, but I have watched a couple of things.
I wouldn't encourage you to.
Perfect. A couple of things I have been watching that I wanted to shout out is Margo's Got Money Troubles, had a 3-episode premiere, and I did a whole preamble to this conversation we're having now where I broke it down a little bit. And I would tell everybody to watch that, and you as well, Sona, that there's 3 episodes available. It really doesn't hit the ground until, or really kind of a reveal fully what the show's about, until the end of the 3rd episode. It's really just hitting its premise now, which of course is in all the marketing, so it's not much of a spoiler.
Right, exactly.
But I would recommend that everybody watch those first 3 episodes. And before that, it's really just about this girl, and it's this dramedy in a very kind of very big-hearted, honestly, story about this very dysfunctional family that's kind of brought back together by these very odd circumstances, like not ideal in any way, but somehow it actually is bringing these odd folks closer to each other. And it's a very earnest and sweet and funny, in its very oddball way. And of course, then we get to, oh, and by the way, a very sex positive version of being an OnlyFans creator. As a matter of fact, when she first signs up, she's expecting to see not at all. There's a montage we see of the content she watches there. And it's not really sexual at all. It's like, sometimes these are just two girlfriends sitting on the sofa, like making fun of reality TV together or something. It's almost like having a podcast.
Interesting.
With a little more, a little more scantily clad, but other than that. And so it's really very positive about building an actual community in this very strange way. So I think it's an interesting way to approach the topic. It's also about being on the fringes of society and really trying to hustle to climb that ladder, which of course intersects with this series we're talking about here. And also Euphoria, this whole entire season of Euphoria, which just kicked off this week, turns out to be a critique exactly that, of these people on the fringe trying to make it in the capitalist system. Some are drug dealers, some are OnlyFans models, but a very much grimmer version, as you would expect, given the tone of that show. So an interesting exploration of these topics all simultaneously. So, and of course, Beef, by the way, which also Kim and I watched about half of that yesterday, season 2. And if you wanted to sample that, Sona, by chance, I really do recommend you finish season 1. But anybody who didn't finish season 1 or would like to watch season 2, so we can, we'll be discussing it here on a podcast, you actually can just jump straight into season 2. There is no connective tissue to season 1. And it also thematically very much overlaps with what's happening here on Your Friends and Neighbors. So an interesting combination of shows to be watching in this moment. But it's so far the first half, not as great. I mean, I was so bowled over by season 1. I would say it doesn't achieve that. But we're about halfway through it. We binged through the first half of the show. And we very much like it a lot. And it's just this tension between, and this might be appealing more to you, Sona, rather than these two people who are at loggerheads, it is these two couples that are like, now the dynamic within the couples are shifting, given that they have leverage over each other. And now they've introduced a third couple, which is even more successful. So you have basically this general manager of this golf club that has been caught in a very embarrassing fight with his wife by these kids who work there. And then they're trying to use this revelation to like just get a little step forward. But then you realize as the show progresses that this older couple actually has a lot of issues. And in a lot of ways, they were that younger couple at some point in their past and still are trying to reclaim that. So there's an interesting tension there. And then added to that is this incredibly rich, this billionairess from South Korea who comes in, who's buying the club, and everybody kind of is in this pecking order somewhere in this line. And then you realize that her life is not what it appears to be either. So there's all this constant struggle to achieve something. And then even when you have something, to maintain it. And it's an interesting dynamic that's playing out there. But I think because of those overlapping couple dynamics, you might actually appreciate this even more than. And for all those reasons, it's interesting that all these shows are on at the same time, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay. That being said, let's talk about this third episode of Your Friends and Neighbors. You just texted me moments before, as you were watching this show up, that you were enjoying this a lot more. And I simultaneously have so many criticisms, which I will save this time until we get later on. But I absolutely enjoyed this much more than last week's episode, although I still have all the same caveats of concerns where this is all heading. But I will save that for later on.
Sure. So, I don't disagree, but I'm willing to forgive so much more when something is really entertaining.
Interested, exactly. And entertaining.
And I felt this was really entertaining. What a relief.
Indeed. I've lost my notes. I'm locating them. So this episode picks up immediately after the events of last week's episode. We have Coop and Ashe in the office together. Coop, for the first time, loses his cool. He sociopathically cool, calm, and collected, given the circumstance here. And this first, cycle of events where we find out that Ashe, of course, is caught Coop red-handed, has had this camera in place. The book did matter to him. This book was actually given to him as a gift by his wife, who's passed away. And he challenges Coop to have to get this book back. And spoiler for a little bit slightly later in the episode, of course, he goes to reclaim the book from his broker. She has already sold the book to a collector. She sold it to the collector for $200,000. Coop shows up at her place with $100,000 in the bag to buy back the book, which is the money she gave him. But nope, not good enough. She needs to reclaim the money she's lost, which of course is the $200,000. But then she needs to talk, or he asks to talk directly to who the collector is. And of course, it turns out in the end that it is Ashe himself. So
very predictably.
Yes, true. But given all that you see there, a couple questions there. Do you buy that Ashe has just simply put the camera there? It really feels from a further back purview that it's as if this whole thing is a sting operation, especially given where this lands by the time this episode lands. It feels like Ashe has set up Coop so that Coop could become his hedge fund manager and get him back into his old business, right? Like it really feels like this has all been set up, but that can't possibly be the case, right? This has got to be coincidence largely, no?
That had never occurred to me while I was watching the episode. I guess it is possible, but that would require that Ashe already knew of Coop's little hobby, right?
Right. I mean, I completely agree, by the way, that my theory that this was all a setup doesn't make any sense. Well, now that I'm thinking about it, unless he's being set up by somebody else and Ashe is like not a pawn, but, participating in this. But yeah, because there is a version of this story where someone knows that Coop is the cat burglar, has set up the house in a way where it's easy pickings, has allowed him to know about this book collection, that has put the cameras there, not only in the books, you can imagine like multiple cameras, as he mentions, set up in the house to catch Coop red-handed so that Coop has to be brought back into the fold with his old hedge fund company. So in a way, you can imagine Corbin Burnson is setting everybody up so that this would be a way to get his print back. But more importantly, I think maybe more than the print is to get Coop into hot water. So it's all a revenge plot. So it is possible that all of this is set up, because think about the logistics of this where, and by the way, I do think this is what the show is telling us, that this is just a happenstance. But imagine that, see, now the reason I'm second guessing all this as I start talking it out is I'm thinking about all the film references that are in the film. And one of the things that's here on the wall in the poster is the sting. And the sting is exactly this kind of setup that I am saying. So maybe I have stumbled upon something that is actually, I hadn't noticed until this very moment. But because it suddenly starts feeling like a lot of coincidences, right? He's a cat burglar. He gets caught red-handed. The book is there, it seems like easy pickings, all of this. And then, of course, for Marsden's character, for Ashe, then the request he has is to get him back into his old job again, right? Or connected back to that. And all of this that's happening, all this subterfuge of him meeting with all these brokers in town is just so that he never has to approach Corbin Burnson. They will come to him, right? Then that way it seems like but is there a grander scheme in place here? Because if it's Ashe who's doing this, then Ashe must have known he was the cat burglar and known he has this connection, and all of this is a setup, which seems far-fetched. But maybe there's someone else who is pulling the string. But in general, just like taking it at face value, what did you think of this reveal? I did very much enjoying the Ashe character and loved like that meeting in the restaurant where he's there waiting for him. And the way that all played out was very entertaining.
Yeah, it's so fun. And it's fun to watch those two characters together. So even though for me, it was very predictable that Ashe was the one that bought the book to begin with, I still had fun watching it.
Yeah, this has been agreed that this part of the show, again, is by far the strongest part of the show.
Yes.
And still, even as we now have a central plot, and it's so important, by the way, like our reaction to this episode, which is still just as messily written, honestly, as the previous episodes, but just having a focused direction where these two characters have something like some information on each other, some leverage on each other, and just seeing them work together. And honestly, even Marsden's character in his other contexts, I love him trying to be the cool guy, the cool dad, and like desperately always trying to impress people, even though he is the richest guy in town, apparently. Could casually be like, hey, let me put $1 billion together for this plot we're putting together. I think pretty much no one else in that town, everyone else is pretending to have that kind of wealth and don't have anywhere near that type of wealth. But then, of course, the question is, how did he acquire that wealth and why does he need to hide it or not hide it, but how does he need to wash it in his own way? So, yeah, I love that, just having a direction for the plot, just in this one particular case, has already made the show much more watchable. Let's wrap up some of the other details about that. Do you know anything about this OFAC? What is this? The Office of Foreign Asset Control? Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. I haven't worked in that area. I'm straight up a litigator and not a regulatory litigator. So I don't know much about it, but I haven't Googled it, nothing, even though Coop is Googling it in the episode. So it does seem like something that would exist. Even if it doesn't exist in reality, I would assume that there is some companion to it that is real.
Yeah, from what the little research I did on it, it seems like you are financially frozen. All your assets are frozen in the US. You are considered a national threat. So this is a really, really serious, being on this list is a big deal, like a very big deal. And the idea, of course, as he was Googling there on the show, the idea that he would, and by the way, this explains why he buys the house in cash, right? He can't actually touch any of his assets and use that wealth in the US. So he has to have just these huge amounts of money available like in bank accounts and just pay for everything in cash because he can't actually, get a loan against these assets. They are frozen assets as far as spending that money in the US, which of course, in a way, is why he needs this to happen. But at the same time, he's incredibly wealthy, but can't actually touch that money here in the US. But then it raises all these questions that this may be a legitimately dangerous person, right? These are people who are, funding terrorism, dealing drugs or made their wealth from arms deals or from human trafficking. This is basically the categories. So, and you can imagine, he's like, I deliver containers around the world. I'm like, delivering containers around the world, which might be his legitimate front for all of this, of course, can facilitate terrorism.
Containers of people,
containers of weapons. All these things can very well be.
And he says at one point that he deals with a lot of dangerous people or something like that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, he says that that's part of the reason that he always has his own de facto security system in place is because he has to be wary of these, which of course, again, makes this all feel like a setup, right? That he's like, I let everybody know that I haven't installed the security alarms yet, but I have my own security alarms. Again, it really feels like he's setting up a trap for Coop. And of course, you start seeing, this is what's intriguing about it. You start seeing first of all, it is fun, legitimately fun. And this is something the show has somehow ignored for so long, to keep the criminal aspect of what Coop is doing, but maintaining the high-flying hedge fund manager persona that he is as well, because it's legitimately fun to see him like meeting with all these people. And he's even like luxuriating in the fact that like everyone's buying him these expensive meals, trying to win him back. And of course, he doesn't have to pay for anything, right? He's like the belle of the ball, and everybody is trying to lure him. And now he went from being disgraced to being the hottest commodity in town, which is very fun to watch that reversal, of course. And I love the button on the episode, which I think is a great setup. Just that moment where he walks by and Corbin Burnsen's character, which I really felt was being dismissed from the show completely.
Yeah, I remember you said that. Yeah.
And I'm very surprised that here we are, episode 3, and he's sitting there watching from his own table, knowing that inevitably their paths are going to cross again.
I hope they don't bring that young finance girl back, though.
I know. You know what? I kind of liked her as a character, but I don't. But
they didn't know what to do with her.
Exactly. That's part of the thing I was going to say. I mean,
yeah, I have no problem with her personally, by the way, just to be clear. It's just the character felt useless.
Yes. And I last year, we multiple times were like saying, oh, this is a good character. I can't wait to see how they use her in the show. And it's like, no, they just forgot about her for the whole back half of the show, or used her as a device for Sam to see him kiss her and get angry. It just seemed like a useless character, as you mentioned. But for me, I agree. I don't want them to bring her back, not because I dislike the character at all. I thought she's an interesting character, but because I started doing a head count of the number of like storylines we're following right now in the show. Mm-hmm. And I think we're close to 20 characters that all had speaking parts in this episode of the show. I'm like, this show is juggling way too many plots. Way too many plots.
And I did count the dog. Too many teenagers.
Yes, way too many teenagers. Half of the plot lines I thought of were teenagers themselves. And the dog, of course. The dog's got his own plot line. But I also like what might be teased out here, that there's something fun about, think about this situation, thinking of movies like The Sting, that, we very curious to see which direction that scam could go in. But I like the fact that to invest $400 million, it can't be more than 40% of his total investment amount. So he has to give Coop 600. They have to get to $1 billion and $1. So that's be 600 million additional dollars. So at some point, Coop is going to have $600 million of assets that are supposedly his, with the 400 that are Marsden's, Ashe's character, the Ashe character. So there's going to be a lot of temptation for a thief to have all that money sitting in an account, to not figure out some way to, during one of those transfers, just finagle a few $1 million out of there, which would be almost unnoticed. And by the way, would solve everybody on this show's financial problems. But I worry the show's not going to play in that place. I mean, and you think about, again, what he has given up, Coop has given up in this regard, where he says, my usual fee is 4%. Mm-hmm. A 4% fee on $1 billion would have been $40 million. So $40 million would be an easy way to probably more money than Coop actually had at his peak of wealth. So probably it just goes back to the whole head scratching situation, that he refused to go back and work at his old job. Although now, ironically, he might be forced to do exactly that, and which he could have been doing from the start, even just temporarily, potentially, rather than stealing $100,000 book.
But I do like how, and I think it was the Ashe character in that conversation kind of called him out on that, right? Yeah. Like, why are you even doing this to begin with?
Right, exactly. And still driving that car around. Again, you just think about the fact that, he can get a couple $100,000 just for his car. That's a Maserati, and it's a classic. By the way, you can get a used Maserati, because they lose their value so quickly, for $50,000 or $80,000 for an older one like that. But this is like a collectible. So John Hamm has said that this is an $800,000 car that he's driving around in this show. So if this is a collectible Maserati that we're supposed to believe, this isn't just an old Maserati that looks extra pretty for the show, and it's like a used car. But if we're supposed to read it as, no, this is a collectible Maserati, again, he's just like, I can't pay my bills this month. Sell your $800,000 car, guy. Come on.
Did he get the trunk fixed now that we don't need it as a plot device anymore?
I was waiting for it to pop open this week. It did not. So I think he did finally fix the trunk. So no one else can plant evidence in there again. So this is a lot of fun. Any other key points here? The golf, again, going to the idea that Ashe is somewhat of a pretender of being in this world. And of course, you have the House of Mirth as a kind of reference point there again, to call out all the literary references that are being made in the show, that he's kind of a pretender. The Great Gatsby, again, another reference point as well. But it's funny because, yes, he's trying to be like, oh, I'm not a great golfer, but he's trying to act like he should be, or this is like kind of what he should pretend to be into. But it doesn't just go there. I like when he's trying to be cool with the teenagers, which he did last week when he took them to a concert together. But also when he shows up and he's trying to play guitar and he's like not very good at it, can barely play a chord. So I did like this in general, that this guy's always trying to be the coolest guy in the room, but it's like he always knows he's not. So it's intriguing. What do you think of his character here? What do you think that's trying to show us about him, that he's always trying to ingratiate himself with somebody? And then when he's like hanging out with Sam and they're having pizza, he seems to have a real interest in her. And I think he has a real interest in Coop as well, but he's not above threatening people either. So what do you make of this character in general?
I'm not sure what I make of it, but I do think he is very self-aware, which I like. And I think it's making this character fun to watch, that even when he's trying to be cool, he is aware that he's a middle-aged guy trying to be cool. Like when he sits down with the kids in the studio and then he kind of has this second of, what am I doing here? I got to go. Right. So I do like that about him. And I think it makes the character endearing in a way.
Yeah. It's funny because he may very well, and maybe this is I've been complimenting Marsden for his performance and I continue to, but maybe this might be too much of his ability in this role if it turns out that he is like a human trafficker.
Truly evil. Yeah.
So that'd be quite a twist if that's what happens by the end of it.
I liked in this episode also his date with Olivia Munn. I thought
it was great. I thought so.
A really nice chemistry between them. And I am not the biggest Olivia Munn fan, and I am not the biggest fan of this Mel. Not Mel. Who's Mel? Is it Amanda Peet or is it Olivia Munn?
Mel is Amanda Peet. Sam.
Okay.
Sam
is Olivia. Both nicknames that are male names, and that's where I got confused.
True.
So I'm not the biggest fan of the Sam character. I'm not the biggest Olivia Munn fan, but I liked this chemistry between them. I thought it was really nice.
Yeah, I've actually have liked Olivia Munn in some things. I did not like her very much in season 1 of the show, but she has such great chemistry with Marsden that I've been really enjoying them together in this second season of the show for sure. And I totally agree. I love their date. I like that he's trying to impress her and take her to this really fancy restaurant. And she's like, well, that's going to be just people are going to be gossiping even more so. And he's not only takes her to a pizza shop, but he takes her to like his favorite pizza shop. And it seems like the pizza's really great. And he says that I like to, whenever I'm in some place, find like just a hole in the wall place that, and by the way, New York is exactly like this, because there's like this pizza shop that's been there for 50 years. And if you've been around for 50 years in New York City making pizza, that's got to be some damn good pizza, right? So it is really fun to see them together. So it makes him a really likable character. He seems, like you said before, he's very self-aware. He's performing being this like over-the-top character. But in the end, he is totally fine hanging out at a pizza shop. So it's fun to see them. And he's legitimately, part of it is he doesn't want to talk about his own biography.
Yes.
But he seems legitimately interested in her story. And I think, again, when he has some real affinity, and this will be fun to watch play out with Coop, because he likes these people who are not necessarily fitting the mold of, especially in this kind of elitist world that he's in, which of course is going to be very complicated. And I actually look forward to this if the show makes us fall in love with this character. And then it turns out he's a really, really despicable
He's a terrible person.
I
also like the whole continued theme of why can't it be both? I thought that was a cute running verbal thing they were doing.
Well, I think that is something that is maybe going back to what we were saying before. Why not both? Maybe it'll turn out that it's, he's such a grounded person. He's so caring.
And he's a human trafficker.
And he is, makes his money off of really, really horrible things, because he might just rationalize it as if, well, somebody's going to do it. So I might as well get rich doing it myself. So why not both? Why not both? Okay, far less interesting is all the other plot lines. And boy, Sona, there are so many plot lines. All right, let's start with maybe the least interesting and work our way into some of the more interesting ones. Mel and the dog. He did, like you said, what it's going to do with that she was going to put it in a bag and put it on the steps. That's exactly what she did.
I think it was actually your wife that said that. Good call on her part.
Yes. So that's what we get. Exactly that. I do like the way she presented it. She's like, oh, you left this at my house.
In a little gift bag. Yeah.
Yeah, very cute. So hopefully that's enough of a indicator that they need to do something about that dog. But this, of course, is indicative, is again, the metaphor there of Mel losing control of her body and her life and her expectations of her daughter all in midlife. What did you think about her? We talked about how, and it continues to be the case here, I liked Tori even less in some ways here, but in some ways more. On the left side, when first of all, Mel goes and talks to this interviewer for Princeton and has him rescind the rescinding of the offer, and then only to have the daughter irritated even more by this and saying, well, I'm just going to reject it yet again. This, of course, importantly means that she's now living with the dad, as is the son. So everybody's living there now.
Right.
Poor Coop, by the way. He's got that, that he's paying for that giant house. The family doesn't even live there anymore. As soon as Mel starts dating someone else, she won't be living there anymore either, like when she was living with Nick. And that giant house is just his biggest bill that no one lives in. So probably $100,000 a year in property taxes. But now Tori, it's like, still has no plan. Of course, very irritating. We discussed how irritating that is, having this kid be like, I don't have a plan for all this. But I did like her basically throwing everything in her mom's face and being like, I don't want to be like you. And that was, hurtful to Mel, but
so
in
hurtful.
a way,
My gosh, so hurtful.
But in a way, I mean, it does put a point on the fact that what has Mel been doing? She cheated on it's like she can't really attack her daughter for not knowing what she wants when the reality is she's a middle-aged woman and everything that her daughter tells her is true, right? You cheated on dad. Dad's still supporting you. You didn't marry Nick, lost your job, and you get into a fight with the dad's new girlfriend at the time. That's what led to some of these things. What do you want, Mom? What are you trying to tell me what to do with my life? What are you going to do with your life? And I did think that was, in a way, the most articulate thing she's had about this. Although, I still agree, as a middle-aged man myself, you better have a plan, girl. How are you paying the bills until you decide what school or whatever you're going to do next?
Yeah, I understand the point she was making, and maybe if I were a younger person, I would feel differently about this conversation.
Right.
But as a middle-aged person, it's like, where do you get off judging my life? And, right. I don't know. I didn't care for it.
Yes, I think our age is showing there for sure. But I did sympathize with what she was saying to her mom, to be honest.
Yeah.
I still do not take Coop's perspective that it's like, hey, she'll figure it out. I'm like, no. That's not going to fly. She's got to get a job at least minimum until she figures this all out. Also, a big plot point here. Oh, there's so many plot points here. What did you make of I'm just kind of my head spinning at how much stuff happened in this episode. So we have Elena, who is now a citizen.
Right.
She's gone for her citizenship. What did you make of this scene? Importantly, the juxtaposition of her swearing to allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, but that whole citizenship event, and then juxtaposed directly with her cleaning this robot's toilet. What did you think about that?
I mean, it does seem to be a commentary on America and what it offers people who give up so much to be here.
And but sometimes that is, that's all you can get, which is, of course, but like you said, I mean, my mom was a seamstress. My dad was a construction worker. And, this is a lot of labor that the country needs. And interesting that this is now the circumstance she puts herself in. But of course, she's also stealing money from these rich people, or assisting anyway in that way. I also thought it was interesting the casting choices they made in the other people who were there swearing in. Like you have people in their military fatigues, which is interesting as well, because you think about there are a lot of immigrants that are in our forces as well.
For sure.
So something's being said there, but also the irony that part of the American dream now is being a criminal, or maybe that you have to be a criminal to achieve some of that, which of course dovetails with a lot of the other shows I brought up earlier in our conversation, explicitly as well. And what do you think about this? Coop now is blowing her off because he doesn't want to tell her. He doesn't tell anybody anything, which is a big problem with this guy, by the way, that he can't be doing these jobs because right now he's been caught red-handed and he has to put that on the back burner while he is figuring this new situation out. And of course, Barney's also doing his work. We got to talk about Barney and his whole situation. So all of that is happening and he's not letting her in on it, but she really needs that money. So now he has, he's already has this need to pay everybody's bills, even when he can't necessarily afford to, and he can't admit to anyone that's the case. And now he just has more mouths to feed here in this whole situation. Mm-hmm. And while he's got her on the outs, I assume that's not going to last that long, because then what would be the purpose of even having that character still so active in or central in the storyline? But Barney now is going to be laundering, speaking of this weird parallel, right, where he's going to be laundering Ashe's money, $1 billion or $500 million nearly. And of course, meanwhile, he needs to launder his much smaller money through the gyms now, apparently. That's the setup here, right?
Yeah, for sure. And didn't something seem sketchy with that power of attorney?
Well, I think that's what it is, right? I think that Barney is getting him to hand over power of attorney. And then it looks like they're taking checks that are written from the father-in-law's bank accounts. Is that right?
Definitely use the father-in-law's name as like the dummy business or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So the money is somehow going into those accounts, and then that money is going into the gyms as if he's like an investor. So that's how the money's getting laundered, apparently. And, the whole idea that, well, maybe the jobs that they're pulling is going to be backburnered for a significant amount of time on the show doesn't seem to be the case at all, considering that we have this, just the whole setup here. Like, this is like a big plot point here that we now know that some of that money is going to be funneled through Nick's gym, which of course then could get Nick involved in this unknowingly, possibly as well, if something happens with that, or they find out that some of that money is coming from stolen goods. So all of that is problematic. And of course, Barney also let his wife know that he's not going to work for her dad.
Yes. Instead, he will turn to a life of crime.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, how they're going to make that into this, I have all the questions I had last week. The math isn't mathing once again, when you actually play that all out, especially, by the way, where you could theoretically say, well, Barney doesn't need this, because if Coop can funnel a little bit, just a sliver of that money from out of Ashe's account, then that would make everybody liquid, right? But apparently, I guess because he hasn't told Barney what's going on, that he's being blackmailed by Ashe, that nobody's the wiser about that so far. Anyway, nobody knows what the other person's doing. This is actually across the board. I think about the fact that Barney's doing what he's doing. If he knew that this whole thing is happening with $1 billion of Ashe's money, Barney's going to be like, oh, we got to get some of that legitimate money, man. Put it into that, your investment account back at the hedge funds. We're all doing great. But Barney doesn't know that. So he's still trying to set up this shell company, or these kind of shell transactions, to hide this money inside of Nick's operations. Nick doesn't know that that's happening. Elena doesn't know what's happening. Elena, I kind of knows that Barney's setting this up with Nick, and that's kind of knows that that's how the money laundering is going to happen. But it's like nobody knows. The right hand and left hand not talking at all in this show, which could be a problem eventually. And then, of course, maybe the least interesting of all of these, the romantic lives of the teenagers. What do you think about all of this? Like, why are we spending so much time with this love triangle? The poor girl who played his girlfriend last season. Does she even get to speak dialogue here, or does she just get to scowl?
Such a good question. Maybe it's going to pay off somehow in that they're going to share with each other some inside info about their dads that will somehow be relevant to the bigger plot. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important. And the daughter probably knows things about the dad. But I mean, it all depends. I was about to say that at this moment, all she is like kind of like, oh, dad's always trying to be cool and he's so uncool. And that's the extent of it. Maybe something sketchy happened with the death of the mom, I can't imagine that he like killed, maybe the mom was wealthy and he inherited money from her. I was trying to think of maybe he's going in one of those directions, but I have a feeling that that would be weird to have him reverse on that. Maybe something terrible happened to the mom because of the business he's in, and that would be an interesting.
Feels like that's kind of likely.
Yeah, that would be the most interesting direction that could go in, I think. Who else is there that we need to talk about? We talked about Mel. Anything else on the Mel front? Talked about Sam. Talked about Ashe.
Barney's wife being pregnant and all of that is like a running thing that we didn't directly address. Nick and his off-brandist show or whatever it was called.
Oh, yeah. What did you think about that? So he's putting on a really bad performance.
Yeah, some kind of blooper show of some sort, I suppose. I don't know.
I couldn't even figure out what that was, whether it was supposed to be funny that he was playing so badly or whether he was doing so badly on accidentally. And they're like, oh, we're going to make this look great. Like in the edit.
No, I think it was on purpose.
It was him just being completely inept. And
when he intros the show off-brandist or whatever it was called.
Right.
The whole premise is people that have screwed up something somehow.
Interesting. But he seems to be doing pretty well. So.
Yeah.
He could pay everybody else's bills if they could tell them what's going on in their lives. All right. The last thing I wanted to bring up was again, these cinematic references that might be being made in the show. One of the posters we see in the background is a French poster, but it's actually for the film High Noon. And High Noon, of course, has this final confrontation between this good guy and bad guy. So maybe that's a bit of a clue to something that's coming. I thought The Sting is definitely a big one, and I hadn't made the connection at the time. I'm like, and now that I was playing out, well, could this be such an elaborate setup for Coop? That kind of seems ridiculous. I'm like, it's the kind of ridiculous thing that happens in some of these movies he watches. So maybe that is a clue that there is a big con of some kind occurring here. And specifically in this movie, we see The Killing, which is Stanley Kubrick's third movie I think he made, and his first like hit. It's a really great film, by the way, and like not like Kubrick's other films became, he became his own genre basically. But this is a crime thriller, like a film noir about a robbery that happens at a racetrack and how you like bring the gang all together, like an Ocean's 11 type thing to pull off this heist. And then how the heist goes afterwards, after they successfully pull off the heist, how everything falls apart interpersonally between those folks. So I think that might be a clue that some big heist, and it could be maybe this $1 billion, some kind of funneling of cash, and all these people that we've seen here on the show are all somehow brought into it, and that it looks like, and Coop does it. He funneled the $50 million into his own pocket, and he pulled off the biggest heist of his life, and then everything falls apart afterwards. So maybe that is a pattern we're going to see repeated. And we also see, I'm not sure if I'm 100% right about this one. I think the other film we saw here was The Driver, which is another movie I just happen to have seen just this very year, ironically here. But I could even be wrong about that. But I think it's The Driver. And that is about a guy who drives for the mob and gets himself into trouble. So I'm not sure if we're going to see a giant car chase before the end of the film, but this series, I should say. But maybe they all have really nice, fast cars. So maybe something like that will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I am curious about The Killing and very curious about The Sting as far as some kind of reference to what might be happening here in the background. And I think that's it. I can't wait to see him have this confrontation with Corbin Burnson's character, who I can't remember his name, but that character, his former boss. And I mean, you just think about that, how he abandoned that money, that account that would have fixed everything for him. Not even the new business, but just the old account that he had, that they had locked away, those tens of millions of dollars. That in and of itself would have resolved all of his financial problems. And here he is again, in the belly of the beast, potentially going back, and they're going to try to lure in this large deal. And even if he can't get his hands on Ashe's cash, funnel some of that money away, he can say, yeah, I'll come back. I'll do this deal with you, but you got to give me my old account back, my old funds, which, his percentage on that was, again, tens of millions of dollars, right? Which was his main nest egg from his previous life. So you can imagine him just saying, yeah, I'll do this with you if you just give me that money. And wouldn't that just alleviate all of his financial problems?
You would think.
Do you think the show will do that? Or do you think the show wants him to, they want to manufacture some kind of despondency he's in, which I don't understand that about the show. Here's where I'm going to get critical about it. I don't understand how the show keeps, trying to manufacture that things are really dire for him when at any turn he can get himself out of the situation. And then they don't want to explore the fact that he chooses not to and like basically manufactures a disaster for himself to be in. And that is very frustrating because he doesn't address it at all.
That's the real inexplicable gap in this show, is that there's so much room for some sort of character study of why somebody would be self-destructive in this way.
Exactly.
And the show just chooses to dance around it for some reason.
Yeah. And I don't get it. And it is so frustrating because I just I understand that he could be totally self-destructive. I could imagine a version of this where he gets his millions of dollar payday at the end of last season and then he blows it all up and he doesn't even understand why. But you need to address that. You can't just be like, yeah, I got $10 million over there, but no big deal. And then instead of being like, oh my God, I'm like really over a barrel right now. There's no way out of the situation. And he's really sweating it. He's never sweating it. He's like, if they find me in this house I was robbing, I'll come up with some excuse. Like he never seems perturbed by anything. So I don't understand, his mentality at all. It really feels like and this is maybe an issue with the way he performs this role, or maybe an issue with the way he's written. But even the way that he's like goofing around with his sister, we should talk about her for a moment as well. But, in this week's episode, after Googling, how long can I go to jail? Ooh, 20 years. Okay. Anyway, let me go goof around my sister for a little bit. And none of this is making you sweat at all.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy, his reaction to this. What did you think about his sister going to try to teach these disengaged kids in school?
I mean, I don't think we need this whole plot, first of all.
I thought maybe this is where they're going with it. I thought if they could do a whole School of Rock thing. I just saw a School of Rock, by the way, in our high school put the show on, and some of the kids were in it. But so it's on my mind again. But you could imagine her being like, she's going to be unconventional and crack these kids out. And maybe that still will happen. But
sure.
if the point of this is just that she's going to have to do a tedious job like everybody else on the show who really doesn't like the job they're doing to be legitimate, and the kids are just like, I just want to learn chord progressions and I don't even have a favorite song. Why are you learning how to play guitar if you don't even have any fantasy of ever playing a song on your own? I just don't buy this view of these kids at all. I think that those are pretty unrealistic portrayal of those kids, to be honest. Not a single kid in that class is like, oh my God, I love this guitar solo in this Led Zeppelin song. None, not one. What are you talking about? Why are you taking this class?
Maybe it's some sort of weird requirement to graduate.
It could be or just like, hey, I want to have something on my resume that I tried to learn how to play guitar. I don't know if that gets you into an Ivy League school, but anyway, maybe it's trying to make you look interesting on paper. But again, I go back to the fact that not a single kid, it's not that 80% of the class is just like, this is an easy grade. It's pass, fail, roll their eyes, right? It's just that nobody in that class really wants to learn how to play like a rock and roll song. Come on. I don't buy it. But anyway, maybe she will be able to get these kids out of their comfort zones. And that could get her into trouble too. She starts getting manic. As I can tell, Sona, you're riveted by this storyline. Just another plate they're spinning.
I mean, I don't know. The whole subplot with this sister to begin with is like a little strange, and I mean, not strange, but unnecessary, I feel. So going on a deeper dive into it is not really necessary to me.
I agree. And one other note on all this, by the way, Sona, if IMDb is correct, as you pulled it up here, out of curiosity, last season had 9 episodes, and Apple often has these odd numbered episodes, not the kind of the usual 10 or 6 or 12, sometimes 13, but doesn't have those. They usually have this odd number, like a 8 episode or 9 episode. Pluribus was 9, I believe. Severance was 9. So it's kind of had these kind of weird pattern. But if IMDb is correct, we have 10 episodes, Sona. We got 10 episodes of this season. So maybe that's why they're pacing their plot. So
maybe the whole last episode is just a music class.
Could you imagine we have one more episode each that follows each one of these storylines and equally balanced? One of them is just set in the high school with the kids and arguing with his girlfriend. I'm sure we'll be looking forward to that one. All right, Sona. So Kim and I have finished watching The Pit, and we'll be discussing that, and we'll be publishing it
Great.
over the weekend. And we are talking about Euphoria. And check out some of those shows I mentioned if you choose to. And we will be discussing them next week on the show, as well as, of course, Sona, you and I will be discussing Your Friends and Neighbors, episode 4 next week, and hopefully more Ashe and Coop scenes and less high school scenes.
Let's hope.
All right. Thanks again, Sona, for the conversation.
Talk to you soon. Thank you.